Welcome to the second episode of my Coffee Talk series, where each week I talk about destinations that will inspire you and discuss ways that you can travel there to experience them. Apparently, some people don't like that I talk in my Coffee Talk series, so I guess you just can't please everyone, right? So, this series is not about finding the cheapest deals or cutting corners. It's all about highlighting a destination and offering insight into travel experiences. So, whether you're just here for a little inspiration or ready to book that dream trip, you're in the right place. Today, I'm talking about Neuschwanstein Castle and the mystery behind what happened to Mad King Ludwig II of Bavaria. Now, this is more of a storytelling episode that I researched a few years ago, and I visited this castle before I started filming videos, so I'll insert a few images, but mostly it'll just be a talking head telling the story. I hope you enjoy and are inspired to visit this region of Germany. If you're anything like me, you are fascinated with the stories behind the places that you visit. I just soak up the tales of people who were there before me, their lives, their accomplishments, and their failures. This happened when I visited Neuschwanstein Castle in Germany. Now, I will do my best to pronounce everything properly, but I apologize in advance wholeheartedly if and when I mess up anything with these German terms and names. Our guide was a wonderful storyteller, and after the tour ended, I was inspired to learn more about King Ludwig II, his life, and the mystery of his death. So I came home, researched, and I'm sharing his story with you today. King Ludwig II was born in 1846 at Nymphenburg Palace, located in what today is part of central Munich, and it's one of the premier royal palaces of Europe. He was born to Maximilian II of Bavaria and Marie of Prussia, who later became the King and Queen of Bavaria in 1848. His parents had planned on naming him Otto, but his grandfather, the notorious King Ludwig I, insisted that his grandson be named after him since they were both born on August 25th, which is a feast day of St. Louis IX of France, who is the patron saint of Bavaria. His full name was Ludwig Otto Frederick Wilhelm, or in English, Louis Otto Frederick William. His parents then named his younger brother by 3 years, Otto. Ludwig was also known as the Swan King, the Fairy Tale King, and the Mad King, and he held Count and Duke titles as well. Now, this man has so many names and nicknames that I'm just going to call him Ludwig from now on. As he was growing up, Ludwig was always being reminded of his royal status. His father wanted to teach both of his sons about the burdens of royal duty from an early age. Ludwig was both extremely indulged as well as severely controlled by his tutors, who subjected him to a strict regimen of study and exercise. Some say that the stresses of growing up in a royal family are the reasons for a lot of his odd behavior as an adult. Ludwig was not close to either of his parents. He was much closer to his grandfather, but they did have some happy moments in his childhood. As a family, they visited Lake Starnberg, where later in 1886, Ludwig was found dead in the lake. Most of the time, he lived at Schloss or Castle Hohenschwangau. It's a fantasy castle that his father had bought near Alp Lake, which is near Füssen, a town known for violin making. It's the yellow-colored castle at the bottom of the hill when you're walking up to Neuschwanstein Castle. Now, this castle was decorated in the Gothic Revival style, with many frescoes depicting heroic German sagas, mostly notable images of Lohengrin, the Knight of the Swans. Neuschwanstein literally means New Swan Stone Castle, and Hohenschwangau is High Swan District Castle. Now, these definitions show how they are tied to Ludwig being called the Swan King. Ludwig became King of Bavaria in 1864 at the age of 18 after his father passed away from a short and unexpected illness. Although Ludwig wasn't prepared to be king, his youth and his brooding good looks made him super popular in Bavaria. He reigned until 1886, where he mysteriously died. His brother Otto then became king, and sadly, both brothers had been declared insane and deposed at some point during their reigns. 2 years after Ludwig became king, when he was only 20, Bavaria and Austria fought a war against Prussia that lasted only a few weeks and they lost. Other wars continued, and I won't go into detail of the wars, but I'll focus more on Ludwig's personal life because that's where all the juicy gossip is. After they lost the war, Ludwig pulled back from his day to day duties and instead he focused on extravagant artistic and architectural projects. He commissioned the construction of two lavish palaces plus Neuschwanstein Castle. Side note, this castle is so gorgeous. I visited it in October, November, a number of years ago, which was before I started shooting video, like I said. So here's a really bad photo of it. I would love to visit again in the springtime. And if you're a Disney fan, you may recognize that this is the castle that gave Walt Disney his inspiration for Sleeping Beauty's castle. Ludwig spent all his royal money on these projects. He borrowed a lot of money and ignored the attempts of his ministers to curb his spending. This extravagant behavior was used against him to declare him insane. Since then, this decision has come under scrutiny because today his legacy includes many of Bavaria's most important tourist attractions. After he became king, Ludwig became close friends with his personal helper, Prince Paul, who was a member of another wealthy Bavarian family, and he had served as a junior lieutenant in the 2nd Bavarian Artillery Regiment. The two young men rode together, read poetry aloud, and staged scenes from the romantic operas of Richard Wagner, who Ludwig was a devoted patron of since he was 15. There were rumors that they were more than just friends, but their friendship ended when Paul became engaged in 1866 with a commoner. During his youth, Ludwig was also BFFs with his cousin Duchess Elizabeth in Bavaria, who later became Empress of Austria. Although Ludwig ruled the same way that his father did, his real interests were in art, music, and architecture. One of the first things he did when he became king was to lay the foundation stone of a new court theater, which is now the Gartnerplatz Theater. Ludwig was eccentric in so many ways that it was problematic to serve as Bavaria's head of state. He hated large public functions and avoided formal social events whenever he could. And why would you blame him? He was extremely introverted and creative and spent most of his time daydreaming. These traits combined with the fact that Ludwig avoided Munich and hated participating in the government there at all costs caused a lot of tension with the royal government ministers. However, he was still popular among the citizens of Bavaria. The king enjoyed traveling through the Bavarian countryside and chatting with the farmers and the workers that he met along the way. He definitely was a people person that way. He also enjoyed showering those who were pleasant to him during his travels with extravagant gifts. He is still remembered in Bavaria as their cherished king. Over the next number of years, there were wars that I'll skip talking about, and I'll just say that Bavaria lost its status as an independent kingdom in 1870. Now, one of the great stresses of Ludwig's early reign was pressure to produce an heir. So he proposed to his cousin, Duchess Sophie Charlotte, who shared a deep interest in the works of Richard Wagner. Their engagement was publicized on January 2nd, 1867. Still, after they postponed the wedding date many times, Ludwig finally canceled it in October because Sophie had fallen in love with a court photographer. She had many other marriage proposals, but she finally settled on marrying Prince Ferdinand of Orleans. Now, just a side note for the true crime fans out there, Sophie Charlotte died in a fire at a bazaar in Paris in 1897. She had been helping to raise funds for a charity when the projection equipment caught on fire. She refused to be rescued and insisted that the girls, the visitors, and the nuns working with her at the bazaar be saved first. Identifying her remains was not an easy thing to do, so her dentist was called in. After a couple hours of examining various bodies, he identified Sophie Charlotte based on her gold fillings, and she became one of the first people whose remains were identified by forensic dentistry. Now let's get back to Ludwig's story. Ludwig never married or had any mistresses that we know of. From his diary, which began in 1869, private letters, and other surviving personal documents, it's clear that he struggled all his life to suppress his homosexual desires and remain true to the teachings of the Catholic Church. In those days, a scandal of a homosexual monarch would have been intolerable. We don't know much about his personal life, as Ludwig's original diaries were lost during World War II, and all that remains today are copies of the entries made during the 1886 plot to depose him. After 1871, Ludwig withdrew from politics and devoted himself to his personal creative projects, his castles being the most famous, and he personally approved every detail of the decorations, the architecture, and all of the furnishings. As I mentioned before, Ludwig was obsessed with the operas of Richard Wagner since he was 15 years old, because these operas appealed to his fantasy filled imagination. Wagner had a reputation as a political radical and as a playboy, and was always on the run from creditors. However, on May 4th, 1864, right after Ludwig became king, Wagner was given an unprecedented hour and 45 minutes in front of the new King Ludwig, who probably saved Wagner's career. A year after meeting the king, Wagner presented his latest work, Tristan und Isolde, in Munich. However, the conservative people of Bavaria did not like the composer's extravagant lifestyle and behavior, so Ludwig was forced to ask Wagner to leave Munich. Ludwig considered abdicating to follow Wagner, but Wagner persuaded Ludwig to stay. Ludwig provided a home for Wagner and his family in Switzerland, where he then completed writing more operas. Wagner then planned to build his own opera house. Ludwig refused to support such an extensive project in the beginning, but in the end, he loaned Wagner approximately the equivalent of 5 million euros in today's currency to complete this work. Ludwig's interest in theater was not just confined to Wagner. In 1867, he introduced Munich theatergoers to the best of European drama. Between 1872 and 1885, King Ludwig also had 209 private performances in his residence. This was just for himself or with a guest, because he couldn't concentrate on the operas with so many other people in the theater staring at him instead of at the performances. Now let's talk castles. Ludwig used his personal fortune to build a series of elaborate castles. In 1867, he visited a number of castles in France, which had a huge influence on the style of castles that he planned to build. His building projects provided jobs for hundreds of local artisans and workers. They brought a substantial amount of income into the economy of the poor regions where his castles were built. My favorite and the most well known is, of course, Neuschwanstein Castle. If you haven't seen it in person, it's a place that you will want to add to your bucket list. This is a dramatic Romanesque fortress with stunning fairy tale towers. It is situated on a mountaintop near Ludwig's childhood home of Hohenschwangau Castle. Apparently, Ludwig imagined building a castle in that exact spot when he was still a boy. The walls of Neuschwanstein Castle are decorated with frescoes of scenes from the legends used in Wagner's operas. Ludwig also built Linderhof Palace in a neo-French Rococo style with formal gardens and a Venus grotto where Ludwig was rowed around in a shell-shaped boat. Oh, that's the life, right? This is a perfect Instagram moment if they had Instagram back then. After seeing more operas, Ludwig had other scenes created based on stage sets from the operas, such as an artificial tree built with a sword embedded in it. Ludwig started to build a partial replica of the palace at Versailles as a tribute to Louis XIV of France. Now, this project was abandoned after Ludwig's death. He also built the royal apartment in the residence palace in Munich, and he had added an extravagant winter garden on the roof. It featured an ornamental lake with a small boat, a painted backdrop of the Himalayas, an Indian fisher hut of bamboo, a Moorish kiosk, and an exotic tent. This winter garden was sadly demolished in 1897. Although he had paid for these personal projects with all his own money, it didn't stop Bavaria from falling into financial despair. By 1885, the king was 14 million marks in debt and had borrowed a lot of money from his family. In today's money, can somebody put that down there? I'll also look it up. Instead of listening to advisors and cutting back, he planned even more extravagant designs without hesitation. He was tired of them telling him what to do and always bugging him about finances, and he was thinking of firing the entire cabinet and replacing them with all new people. They were at least one step ahead of him. The ministers decided he was suffering from a mental illness and unable to rule, so they asked Ludwig's uncle, Prince Luitpold, to take over once Ludwig was deposed. He agreed only if they could prove that Ludwig was incompetent and unable to rule. They started working on the report at the beginning of 1886 and bribed the king's servants for complaints and gossip that would support their cause. Some of these included his extreme shyness, his preference for avoiding his kingly duties, dining outside in the cold winter, wearing heavy overcoats in the summer, childish table manners, messiness, sending servants on long, expensive trips for architectural research, his introverted tendencies, and treating his servants horribly. In early June of 1886, the report was finalized and signed by a panel of four psychiatrists, including Dr. Bernhard von Guden, who had never met King Ludwig or examined him. The report stated that he suffered from paranoia. Today, this is not considered correct, and the report also concluded that he was incapable of ruling. Now, this became controversial as well as the circumstances in which Ludwig died. His only younger brother and successor, Otto, was also considered incompetent, providing a convenient basis for the claim of hereditary insanity. At 4 a.m. on June 10th, 1886, a government commission arrived at Neuschwanstein Castle to formally deliver the deposition document to King Ludwig II and place him in custody. However, he was tipped off an hour or two earlier by a faithful servant who ordered the local police to protect him. The commissioners were turned back from the castle gate at gunpoint and arrested. But after holding them captive for several hours, Ludwig had them released. Later that day, the government proclaimed Luitpold as Prince Regent. The king's friends and allies urged him to flee, or at least to show himself in Munich to regain the support of his people. Ludwig instead issued a statement and asked his loyal supporters to help stop all of the false allegations. The government seized most of the copies of the newspaper to try to suppress the statement. Eventually, the king decided that he would try to flee, but he was too late. During the night of June 12th, a second commission arrived. Ludwig was seized just after midnight and was taken to a waiting carriage. Apparently, just the reports from the servants were enough to depose Ludwig. He was transported to Berg Castle on the shores of Lake Starnberg. The next afternoon, Dr. Guden and Ludwig went for a walk on the grounds of Berg Castle, escorted by two attendants. When they returned, Dr. Guden talked to the other doctors, and he shared some concerns that he had about how Ludwig was being treated. After dinner, Ludwig asked Dr. Guden to go on another walk with him, but this time alone and along the shore of the lake. The two men were last seen about 6:30 p.m. and were due back at Berg Castle at 8 p.m., but they never returned. The entire castle staff searched for more than 2 hours during a heavy rainstorm. At 10:30 p.m., the bodies of both the king and doctor were found in the shallow waters along the shore of Lake Starnberg. The king's watch had stopped at 6:54 p.m., and the guards patrolling the park said that they hadn't seen or heard anything unusual. Ludwig's death was officially ruled as an unalive by drowning, but the autopsy report indicated that there wasn't any water in his lungs and he had only a scrape on his knee. Ludwig had always been a very strong swimmer, and the water wasn't even waist deep where his body was found. He had also been in good spirits before the walk. Dr. Gooden's body showed signs of attempted murder, but there wasn't any evidence to support a specific theory. If you want to know more specifics about these, then please check the links in the references below, as I'm not allowed to say certain words on YouTube. So now here's where it gets complicated. On our tour of Neuschwanstein Castle, our guide said that there are over 18 different theories of how King Ludwig died. Let's talk about just a couple of them. The first one is that Ludwig died of natural causes, such as a stroke or a heart attack, after he entered the cold water. Another theory is that Ludwig was shot while trying to escape. Now, this is not proven as the autopsy report indicates no scars or wounds, but a fisherman, Jacob Little, who was sworn to secrecy, wrote in his diary that was passed on to his heirs in 1960 that the king wanted to flee and was shot when he was climbing into the fisherman's boat. The fisherman, Jacob, was so scared that he pushed Ludwig's body back into the water and quickly paddled away. Jacob's diary was authenticated, but then it went missing. But photos of the diary entries do still exist. In the diary, Jacob states that Ludwig and Godin weren't fighting. The footprints on the shore were faked, and they had put shoes on poles and faked footprints to look like they had been fighting. The autopsy was also falsified. The doctor who did the autopsy wanted to clear his conscience in his old age, and he said that the king had bullet wounds in his back. The document proving this had also gone missing. Other witnesses claimed that Ludwig was shot and his shirt had 2 bullet holes in it, and a third shot killed the doctor. A countess claimed to have Ludwig's gray coat with 2 bullet holes in the back, but the coat disappeared in 1973 after both the countess and her husband died in a house fire. There is also talk of a bribe paid to a staff member who found the bodies, giving him lifetime free accommodations to keep him quiet. Another staff member was asked to burn documents and Ludwig's coat with bullet holes in it. After an elaborate funeral on June 19, 1886, Ludwig's remains were interred without his heart in a crypt in Munich. Bavarian tradition called for the king's heart to be placed in a silver urn and sent to the Chapel of Grace, where it was placed beside those of his father and grandfather. 3 years after his death, a small memorial chapel was built overlooking the spot where his body was found, and a cross was erected in the lake. A ceremony remembering King Ludwig II is held in that location every year on June 13th. So in conclusion, nobody really knows the true story of how King Ludwig II died, but to me the most logical theory is that there was a coup and Ludwig and Gudin were shot trying to escape. It was their only way to stop Ludwig from bankrupting Bavaria. He wasn't insane or crazy, just a misunderstood eccentric man who was put in the position of leading a kingdom. He had zero interest in being a king and was possibly overwhelmed by the responsibilities placed on him. Now, I've placed all of my research links in the description below if you'd like to look deeper into all of this, and tell me in the comments below what you think happened to King Ludwig II. I'm interested in hearing every single one of these wild theories, whether they're crazy or not, because it doesn't really seem like it was resolved, does it? I'm also going to put a link to this book in the description below. It's 1,000 Places to See Before You Die, and Neuschwanstein Castle is in there. So it's one thing that I want to go through all of this book and visit as many places as I can, but I'll put an Amazon link below so you can take a look at it too. Now, you can only visit Neuschwanstein Castle as part of a tour, whether it's during a motor coach tour or booking on your own through Viator or Get Your Guide or a company like that. I have a couple of links in the description below that have a number of options for you. The prices vary depending on the specifics of the tour. There are just entry tickets with self-guided audio starting at 61.25 Canadian per person, day trips from Munich starting at 106.62 per person, and private tours, which are over 500 per person. You can book a tour last minute if there's availability, but these days I wouldn't risk it. Everything seems to be selling out so fast. If you prefer to visit on a motor coach tour, you have a lot of options depending on how long you want to be away, what other countries you choose to visit, your departure city, and of course, your budget. One standout motor coach tour is the Best of Germany and Austria, and this is for 13 days. This package starts at $5,275 per person and includes a visit to Neuschwanstein Castle. So, thanks for joining me today in this storytelling episode of Coffee Talk. Did you enjoy this style? And should I write more like this? Or should it be a podcast channel? Maybe I start a podcast channel. If you want to book your getaway, then please get in touch with me using the link below. If you already have a travel agent, then please reach out to them. Now, please share this video with someone else who you think would be interested in European castles. And of course, I'd love if you like and subscribed. So see you next time on Coffee Talk.